Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my podcast on leadership. Today, I'm talking about leadership in relationships. A lot of times when we're having a problem in our relationships, we externalize. We look at the other person and we think, if you could just stop doing that thing that is triggering me, I'll feel better. I'll be okay. And it's a way of really transferring responsibility to the other person. So what if we were to look at relationships differently? What if we were to think about the purpose at soul level of the relationships in our lives? If we were to think of the most difficult person in our life, whether they're present now or they're in the past, and all the stuff they triggered for us, all the things that they brought to the surface, that was an opportunity. If we're going along in life and somebody does something that's maybe disruptive and we don't have a reaction, then we know that whatever that situation is, we've done the internal work that we're okay with it. We know how to cope with it. We might even look at it as this is this person's stuff coming up. It doesn't really have anything to do with me. But if we're triggered, then there was already something going on inside of us before we even had that encounter that person brought to the surface. There's our opportunity. Are we working with what's coming up? Or are we trying to control the external so we don't have to deal with our own stuff? It's easy to get on with the people in our lives that we are in sync with, that are the most comfortable people to be around. But if we're choosing to do spiritual work, if we're choosing to step into leadership in the most spiritual way, then we need to recognize that those uncomfortable relationships are the ones where we get to do the most work and where we grow the most. Now, that being said, if we're dealing with a situation that is downright abusive, the work we do, at least in part, becomes about setting boundaries or even stepping away from those individuals. But the mistake I see a lot of people making is they'll go, okay, I'm just stepping away from that person now. I'm just not going to deal with them anymore. And they think the work is done, when actually they're still carrying the triggered patterns inside themselves. They still have that work to do. And if they don't do it, the universe is going to put yet another petty tyrant in front of them, yet another person to trigger that material. And the more we resist turning inward and doing that work, the bigger the incident the universe has to give us. There's an expression: first you get a message, then you get a warning, then you get an event. So if you don't pick up on the message, the universe is just going to up the ante until you get it. And an event is going to be very disruptive. So you're going to have those opportunities. And if you can see them that way, you will grow in leaps and bounds, because you will, instead of trying to control the people around you, you will first turn inward. And we say, oh, I want a peaceful existence. Peace begins by looking at the war within ourselves. Where am I in resistance? Where am I fighting what's coming up inside of me? If you have anger, if you have fear, if you have grief, do you allow it to come up? Do you sit with those feelings? Do you observe them? Do you ask yourself, what is this really related to? How far back does this go? Or do you just push it down inside or distract yourself because this is really uncomfortable? Doing spiritual work is really uncomfortable. That's why most people don't do it. That's why a lot of people lead lives of quiet desperation instead. So when the discomfort arises, allow it up. Now, there is a difference between allowing it all the way up that it reacts to somebody and allowing yourself to sit with the feelings as they arise. Oh, I'm having all these powerful feelings. And a lot of times, the incident itself might be fairly innocuous, might not be something really big, but if we have a big reaction to it, it's usually because some core pattern is piggybacking on the current situation. Maybe something that happened in our childhood that felt traumatic for us as a child. And remember what I'm saying here, felt traumatic for us as a child. As an adult, we may look back on that and minimize that. Well, that was no big deal and I got over it. But our inner child might have been traumatized because at that age, we have no buffers. We're just open. We don't filter anything. So something that as an adult we can put in a certain frame of reference, we might not have been able to when we were really young. So if there's some slight rebuff in our adult lives, but we're having a big reaction to it, then that's usually a sign that something deeper has been triggered. And that's an opportunity to turn inward and go, why am I having such a powerful reaction? And not asking that question in a judgmental way that puts us down, but to be curious, if I'm having such a big reaction to something that's really, if I think about it logically, not that big a deal, then what's really going on inside of me? What part of me is awakening, coming to the surface, bringing this emotion it's held for me its whole life that I now have the opportunity to work with? And you can have compassion for that part, appreciation for the work it's done to hold that emotion for you so you could go along and function. But to be fully functional, we want to embrace all of who we are. And that means embracing the parts that are still struggling. So we might ask internally of that part, what do you need? What do you need me to see? So that you're getting what you need. And that's that inner leadership. It's serving those parts of us that are in need. Because true leadership means you are a servant to the people that you are serving. It's not a place of status. It's that you are representing a group and therefore need to pay attention to their needs. So if you have a leadership role in the world and you're not operating from that perspective, that's an important shift to make. And it also follows that you're going to shift internally and serve the parts of you trying to come to full awareness. Because what are we all here to do but to wake up as much as we possibly can in this lifetime? And that means acknowledging all those parts that are trying to come to the surface. So one of the things we want to do is create space between a stimulus and a response. A lot of times when something happens that's really jarring for us in our relationships, we want to immediately react. We want to stop that person from doing what they're doing. We want to tell them why they're wrong. We want to control the scenario so we don't have to feel what's coming up for us. If instead we can sit still and ponder what's happening internally until we are centered, the discussion changes. Then it might be, a few days ago when you said such and such, well, I know you probably meant this. And how do you get to that realization? You've sat for a few days and not just pondered your feelings, but pondered what the other person was actually saying. And now you're filtering it differently. So now you're saying, I know you probably meant this, but this is how I received it. It brought something up for me. I've been sitting with it. I've been working on it. And now the discussion you're having isn't about trying to get them to be different. It's about giving you both an opportunity to be more aware of the stuff that's coming up and to be able to say, this is something I'm working on. But now the other person is also aware that when they do that thing, it might trigger you and you might have more work to do on that layer of the onion. You're not necessarily asking them to be different. You're giving them an opportunity to also be aware. And they will either respond to that in an effective way or they won't. But now you have more information about the nature of that relationship. And that is another thing that people do. They have their stuff coming up, they're triggered, but they put up and shut up because they don't want to ruffle any feathers. They don't want to make any waves in that relationship. So the relationship is predicated on pretense. I will pretend I'm okay with what you're saying and doing so I can keep this relationship going. It's a real challenge on our spiritual journey to tell the truth. to be honest with people and to take the risk that they're going to hear something they don't want to hear and they're going to walk away. But as we grow and change, as we shift, some people in our lives will shift as well and move in alignment with us on our path. Some will drop away. And if they do, remember, nature abhors a vacuum. That just creates space for somebody else to come in who's more in alignment with your values and with your journey. So if you want your life ultimately to be what it was always meant to be, stop trying to control the external. Stop trying to control what other people do, what they think, and whether or not they stick around. Show up as you. Work on your stuff. Be honest when there needs to be an exchange, and trust your path. You might not be able to see how it's unfolding, but what the universe has in store for you is greater than our limited ego consciousness can imagine. So when we try to control, we actually make our lives smaller. We're saying, no, I don't want to go into that expanded reality. I'm okay with just this. I just want to work with this. And what's around us is a reflection of our consciousness. So if you choose to only work with what's in front of you and not allow for that to change, if you only want to control what's happening now and not allow it to move in the direction it was meant to, then that's what's going to be reflected in your reality, and your life will be smaller. So every time you find yourself in a challenging situation in a relationship in your life, whether that's a love relationship, family relationship, work relationship, think of that person as offering you an opportunity to become more aware. If you're triggered, that's the stuff that was already there that now you finally have the opportunity to work with, because a lot of times we don't even know what's inside of us unless somebody comes along and pushes that button. Be grateful for that opportunity, even when it's really hard. Be grateful that that person's role in your life at that time is to stir the pot, so you get to discover the richness that is you. Because every part that comes up, even if it's really unhappy when it does, holds some of your energy, your awareness, your talent, your insight. Once it becomes conscious, it can offer you those gifts. You first have to accept it, the way it shows up. That's another thing to remember. Our desire to control other people in our lives gets reflected in our desire to control the parts of us inside that are coming up. When you can accept your own grief, pain, shame, anger, fear, you can be more compassionate when you see it in other people. So in this coming week, do your best to see every interaction with your fellow human being as an opportunity. And if you're triggered, do your best to create even just a little bit of time between stimulus and response, so that you can allow all these feelings to come up. And once you've processed them and you feel more centered, then check in. Do I still need to have an interaction about this with this person? Have I done all I've needed to do internally and that's not necessary now? Try to create that space. Thanks so much for watching. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.